22 and following. Let's go ahead and read through. Starting in chapter 12, verse 22 and following. And he said to his disciples, "For this reason I say to you, do not worry about your life as to what you will eat, nor for your body as to what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor reap. They have no storeroom nor barn, and yet God feeds them. How much more valuable are you than the birds? And which of you by worrying can add a single hour to his lifespan? If then you cannot do even a very little thing, why do you worry about other matters? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. But I tell you, not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass in the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, how much more will he clothe you, you men of little faith? And do not seek what you will eat and what you will drink. Do not keep worrying. For all these things the nations of the world eagerly seek, but your Father knows that you need these things. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has chosen gladly to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to charity. Make yourselves money belts which do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So, how does this particular passage, and I guess I'm calling upon you to reflect and to think about what it was that came before all of this, starting like as far up as verse 13, how does this particular teaching fit in with the context of what Jesus has been talking about? What was Jesus talking about starting in verse 13?
Well, before this, he's talked about if you're ashamed of me, I'm going to be ashamed of you, so to speak.
There is that.
Worry fits right in with that. If you're not ashamed of Jesus, it means that you put your trust in him. Then if your trust that all of a sudden stops, that's not good.
No, you're right. And starting especially in verse 13, there's a guy that comes to him and says, "Master, arbitrate between me and my brother. Make him share my inheritance." And Jesus' response was, "Oh, okay." No.
Who made me?
Yeah, who made me a judge and arbiter in this? And he then does a little bit of teaching on greed, right? And tells a parable about what is sometimes referred to as the foolish farmer who has a bumper crop, you might recall, and is wondering, what am I going to do with all the extra harvest I have? And so he decides to build larger barns and fill them up instead of doing what?
You got it made. Eat, drink, and be merry.
That's right. Instead of giving it to the poor and helping them out, he decided to go ahead and just store it up for himself so that he could retire, as it were, eat, drink, be merry, and live high on the hog. It's kind of I guess he wouldn't live high on the hog if he was Jewish. But anyway, the point being very simply that he opted to be greedy, and then Jesus ends up essentially trying to teach the point that we must beware of all kinds of greed in our lives, and that we need to, verse 21, store up treasure in heaven and be rich toward God. And how do we do that, by the way? How do we store up treasures in heaven and be rich toward God?
Well, Jesus, on one occasion, accused people of not feeding him when he was hungry, or clothing him when he was naked, or visiting when he was sick or in jail. And he made the principle, if you don't do this to the least of these my brethren, you don't do it to me. Or if you do it to my brothers, you are doing it to me.
Exactly. The point being that what we have, is if we have surplus, let's share. In fact, I guess the whole point of the widow who gives her 2 mites, the point of that is maybe even sharing what you don't really even can't afford.
God is totally aware of everything that's going on. Jesus, on one occasion, even said something so insignificant as giving a person a drink of water.
Mm-hmm.
God takes note of and will reward something that we might consider insignificant.
Yeah, exactly. So, what might be the objection that might come up in the minds of a lot of people to what Jesus is teaching here? To share what you have. Don't store it up in bigger barns. Share what you have.
Well, I might need this.
Yeah.
Something might happen.
And why do we say things like that? Lack of trust. Yeah, that's a lot of it. And that is what Jesus is getting to in verse 22, right? Where he says, for this reason I say to you, do not worry about your life as to what you will eat, nor for your body as to what you will put on. And if you were to try to, summarize or boil down what it is that Jesus is teaching in verses 22 through 34, what essentially would he be saying? How would you distill it?
You do your best and God will do the rest.
I like that. It kind of rhymes, doesn't it? Yeah. Do your best and God will do the rest. Don't worry.
Don't obsess over the material things.
Yeah. Don't obsess over the material things. Don't worry about them. That's the big issue here. His command here, by the way, is to stop worrying. In English, if we are giving a command, we frequently will end up putting an exclamation point after the end of it. Stop worrying. But in Greek, there's actually an imperative where you can kind of tell that this is a command. It's not necessarily a suggestion. And what Jesus is saying here is stop worrying. But by the way, what does it mean to worry? And how is it different from legitimate concern? Is it okay to be legitimately concerned? Can you hear all those crickets? I do.
We usually worry about things that are totally beyond our control.
Mm-hmm.
And
What was that again?
Or things that don't even happen.
Sometimes for things that don't even happen. That's true. You?
It's an overactive imagination about negative things. Instead of positive things like love and joy and peace and all that. We're thinking about the wrong things from the wrong perspective.
Yeah. And as Marie was kind of pointing out, there's a lot of pessimism there. It's kind of just sort of obsessing over what if. And, that's easy for us to do, I guess, as human beings. We want to know what the future is, and we'd like to be prepared for the future. We don't want to be in want. So we end up doing what we do. We start storing our acorns away, as it were, to make sure that we have plenty for the future. And what the Lord seems to be saying here is don't worry about that stuff, and you don't necessarily need to stockpile it. And he gives a couple of illustrations about why not. He says, consider the ravens. What do they do or don't do?
Make a lot of noise.
What was that again?
Make a lot of
Well, they do
noise.
make a lot of noise, that's true. What don't they
day
do?
by day, meal by meal.
Yeah. Jesus says here they don't sow, they don't harvest, they don't do any of that sort of stuff. They don't store anything in a barn, and yet God ends up feeding them, and they're just fine. He ends up likewise pointing to the lilies of the field. And what does he say about them? These are all famous passages. Usually we see them in Matthew.
God feeds them.
Yeah. Well, in particular, he says even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. These are more beautiful than what Solomon had. So don't worry about the clothing part either.
Well, the interesting thing is they didn't have a lot. They didn't know whether it's like you said before, they just get enough to put food on the table.
It's pretty much hand to
They go
mouth.
out and do it.
Yeah.
And so I would see that they would worry, but we still worry.
No matter how much we got in the bank, we still worry.
Exactly.
How does that
It's
happen?
just, but I could see how there were times when they were out there, all of the
Yeah.
Jesus in the ministry, and they were like, don't have any food,
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
really didn't have any.
Yeah.
And so I would think that they would worry about things like that.
Mhm.
But yet we still do, and we have more than we need.
Yeah. Yeah. There really is a great deal of teaching, I think, here for us, especially in the culture of the world, the nation that we live in, which is probably far richer than, by far, than any historical civilization has been. Yeah.
Worry is a lack of confidence, and I tell people that worry is a prayer to the wrong God.
Ah. Yeah, exactly. When we're worrying, we're kind of praying to the money god or to Satan. That's right. How much good have you ever noticed that worry does to resolve your problem? Usually a big fat zero, and I think, although there certainly are some exceptions, I'm sure, but I think an awful lot of times the things that we worry about, what happens to them? They never come to pass.
My brother-in-law jokes, he says, worry really helps because about 90% of the things we worry about never happen.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a
true.
quote from Mark Twain that says, I've suffered many catastrophes in my life. Most of them never happen. But you suffer so much.
Oh, yeah.
Thinking about what might.
What might happen? What if? Yes, ma'am.
There's an old saying, it's like worry's like rocking in a rocking chair. You're moving, but you're not getting anywhere.
Ah, I like that one too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So worry doesn't really need to seem to help much of anything, and yet we end up doing it. I mean, Jesus ends up saying, you can't, by worrying, you can't add a single day to your life. In fact, all the health people tell us it probably takes away a few. But anyway, the point is that Jesus says if you can't even do that, add one day to your lifespan by worrying, what do you worry about all the other stuff for? It accomplishes nothing. It's a big fat zero.
I think it's worse than nothing. It paralyzes you, I think, sometimes. And
Yeah.
you go in the negative, right? The time that you have and the mental capacity and whatever that you could spend in actually doing something is spent
Yeah.
negatively.
And it ends up causing us to do things that are sinful, like the rich fool here, right? Who just ends up storehousing everything. Well, we've talked a lot about worry. Is legitimate concern, and how is that differentiated from legitimate concern? Because I think that's important to know, that we do need to be responsible. We just don't need to worry, right? So what's the difference? Help me understand the difference between legitimate concern and worry.
We're concerned about something that is happening right now. We see it going on right now, and that's a concern. If someone is, ill, what do they need? What can we do for them? How can we help? Get them to the doctor, something like that. That's a concern in my mind.
Yeah. Jim?
We might think of worry and concern. People in the coastal areas are subject, of course, to hurricanes from time to time. Now, there are certain things that they do when the weather forecast calls for bad weather. They can put plywood over their windows so that the wind doesn't blow their windows out. Sometimes they'll put sandbags in front of their doors in case the water rises. And those are practical things that can prevent.
Right.
But there are certain things that you can't prevent, and we just have to leave that to God.
Right. There are certain things within our control and certain things that are not inside of our control. And I think legitimate concern recognizes that, you know, I do have to go to work. I do need to earn a living. I do need to, you know, be productive and feed my family and, you know, all the other stuff that goes along with all that. But worry ends up, and I guess I kind of like the word that Fernando used a minute ago, just kind of obsessing over it and wondering about it all the time and trying to find ways of avoiding all kinds of disaster. We can try to prepare as well as we can, but after you've done everything that you can, what else can you do? Nothing.
But in practical terms, how much should I put in my 401k?
That's a fine question. Yeah, and all of that stuff is going to be, in some cases, you know, kind of subject to individual situations. But, you know, it is important to realize that we do need to, and I think that's a good example, we do need to put something away for retirement or whatever. But on the other hand, I know of people who just are almost paralyzed in worry about what's going to happen when I get older, and are constantly trying to find ways to bank up more, because almost anticipating there's going to be some massive disaster and I will go hungry, kind of thing. Yes.
I see it both ways. I see people that were working whole life, saving money, they retired. The week they retired, they got killed in a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, wow. Then in the other stream, I see people that are very careless. They don't save. They have better life than what I had. They're like going to trips, you know, for months, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't work. And I'm like, okay, where are we? Where is our line?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, worrying, trying to find a way to say what's in my head. It is important whenever it is that we're considering the future. We have to do whatever it is that we can. And when we get to the point where we've done everything that we can, then we need to pray. Why would we want to pray? It's pretty obvious. Because God will take care of the rest of it. You know? In the meantime, I think what Jesus is saying here, especially given the context, and especially that very last verse, verse 34, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. You know, that it's important for us to be generous towards others and help whatever it is that we can, whenever we see a need, to try to help. Because again, I think the teaching here largely is attempting to focus very specifically on the reason why it is that people don't get generous towards others. They're thinking to themselves, no, I'm going to need that $1.25. I'm not going to give that away. when in reality, God's got way more than $1.25 to give to you. You know what I'm trying to say, Charles?
Well, I think the difference between concern and worry, concern, you're thinking about something that you'd like to have happen or what you can do to make something happen, and it doesn't take over your whole spirit, your body, your mind, whereas worry can actually just take you over, you know. It can encompass all your thoughts and all your feelings, and where you can't concentrate on other things because you're worrying so much about probably something that you can't have any control over. Some things are just going to happen in life. You can be concerned for them, but don't just worry yourself to death, you know, is an old phrase.
Yeah. And when those, I'm sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
it's important to note though, is that you said do all that you can. You have a part. You can't just sit back and God's gonna take care of it and not do anything. I feel like you have a part, like, but don't try to take over God's part too, you know,
Right,
and
right.
try to say that you're gonna fix it all yourself.
Right.
Because you don't know what the future holds, you don't know, there's a lot of variables you don't know.
Right.
Brain's not gonna help, but I do know people on the flip side that just feel like I'm just gonna let God handle it, not do anything. I'm like, well, there are some things that you can do.
Mhm. Yeah, this is all very true, and I think a lot of the bottom line here really kind of boils down to which is your God, God or money. I don't know if you've ever thought about it before, but one of the definitions of the God that you worship may have an awful lot to do with who do you look to solve your problems. And if you look to money to solve the problems and not to God, then who have you made God? The money. If on the other hand, you're doing all that you can do and you pray to the real God, well, you're basically saying, Lord, I'm doing everything I can do. I know that you're going to take care of the rest. And so I'm going to help the needy. I'm going to do all the things I need to be doing, knowing that you're going to take care of the rest of it. And I think that helps us, maybe, I hope, to kind of differentiate between appropriate concern and obsessive worry, between doing all that we can do and worshiping the one true God versus doing all that we can do plus because we are depending upon the money to be the savior, as it were, from all the disasters that may occur in our lives. So, anyway, does that make any sense to anybody? All right. Well, Jesus is encouraging us to spend our energies on serving others. I think that's a great deal of what he's talking about here. And again, given the context of verse 32, what do you suppose it is that Jesus means when he says, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has chosen to gladly give you the kingdom"? How does that verse fit with the rest of what he's talking about here?
That God is watching, right? And not only watching, but his will towards us is so very good and very generous, and that is seen in the spiritual realm, definitely. But in extension of that, you can find some comfort that he will provide material things, also the necessary material.
Yeah. Perhaps putting it in an illustration this way: if your father is a multi-gazillionaire and you're worried about whether or not you're going to eat, how much sense does that make? Like, not just a whole lot. Especially given the fact that one day your inheritance will be the multi-gazillion dollars. You know what I'm trying to say? And I think that's kind of what he's saying here. If our Father really is God, will He not take care of us? Will He not give to us what it is that we need? And what Jesus is saying here is, fear not, little flock, because He says, your Father has chosen gladly to give you what? The kingdom. If He's planning on giving you the kingdom, then what's He going to do right now? At least make sure that you have what you need. At least make sure that you won't go wanting. And I think those things are important. If God loves us enough to give us heaven and all the riches that go along with that, won't He provide for us the things that we need? Now, what we need is not always necessarily what we might desire or covet or any of the other things. But it's the things that we need. Fernando?
Romans 8 has, I think, really a parallel passage, although stated very differently. And it says that He has given us His Son.
Right.
He did not spare us His Son. How will He not give us with Him all of the other things? You
Yeah.
know? And basically, He has given us something that's infinitely more precious and more valuable.
Right.
This other thing that we are so worried about is minuscule in comparison. Right?
Yeah.
If He gave us His Son, you think He will be stingy with giving us daily bread or whatever necessities of life?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. That's a good parallel passage. It is. Verse 31, but seek His kingdom, and these things will be added to you. So, put your treasure in heaven, and that's where your heart will be. Any other questions about this particular section or thoughts? If not, then we'll go on to Luke, chapter 12, verse 35 and following. Let's go ahead and read through. At least part of it. I'm sure we won't get very far, but anyway. He says, be dressed in readiness and keep your lamps lit. Be like men who are waiting for their master when he returns from the wedding feast, so that they may immediately open the door to him when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master will find on the alert when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will gird himself to serve and have them recline at the table and will come up and wait on them. Whether he comes in the second watch or even in the third and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have allowed his house to be broken into. You too, be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour that you will not expect. Peter said, Lord, are you addressing this parable to us or to everyone else as well? And the Lord said, who then is the faithful and sensible steward, whom his master will put in charge of his servants to give them their rations at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that slave says in his heart, my master will be a long time in coming, and begins to beat the slaves, both men and women, and to eat and drink and get drunk, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers. And that slave who knew his master's will and did not get ready or act in accord with his will receive many lashes. But the one who did not know it and committed deeds worthy of a flogging will receive but few. From everyone who has been given much, much will be required, and to whom they entrust much, of him they will ask all the more. Jesus is talking here about readiness. He says, be dressed in readiness and keep your lamps lit. And then he launches off into this parable. Someone tell me what the parable is in your own words. What is the parable?
Be ready and don't be caught off guard.
Yeah. He says there's a master who goes off to a wedding feast, and we would just say he'd gone off to a wedding reception. It's a party, and he leaves the slaves at home, of course. And what would a master be expecting of his slaves at home?
To have things ready for him when he gets back.
Yeah. Because who knows when he's going to come back? Parties can last a while. And parties in the ancient world did sometimes last into the wee hours of the night. And so it's not that different for today. But the master wants to, it says here, have the slaves dressed in readiness with the lamps lit. So what's all that about? Is that just like, stuff that Jesus decided to kind of throw in there, or Luke decided to kind of, throw in? What's the point of the
Well, we're
being
told
dressed?
to be faithful
Mm-hmm.
until death. Being ready for the master is being faithful.
Yeah. Just kind of taking a look at the illustration. What would the slaves, if the master was coming in late, because by the way, you've worked pretty hard all day. What would the slaves or the servants prefer to do if they could?
They probably prefer punch the time clock and go to bed.
Yeah. And they would be, how do you go to bed? I'm not asking for exactly what color your pajamas are, but, do you, go to sleep in your clothes? Well, no. You get undressed and you put on comfortable clothes and that we call pajamas or whatever, and when we go to bed that way. And then, before we go to bed, we actually do what last thing? Turn off the light. And that's probably what those servants would want to do. You worked all day long, you're tired at the end of the day. When you've worked really on Saturday, well, we're kind of coming into that season, aren't we? Spring and summer are kind of like right around the corner, and we're thinking, yeah, I'd like to get out and mow the lawn and trim the hedges and weed the garden and do all that stuff that I like doing outside. But at the end of the day, we're ready to turn in kind of early. I don't know about you, I am, okay? I'm tired, and so I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to go to bed early. Well, they didn't have a lot of labor-saving devices like we do. They obviously couldn't mow a lawn, but if they were going to plow a field, how were they going to do it? There were no rototillers. They were going to have to get behind a plow. And maybe if they had a draft animal, maybe they would the draft animal would be doing it. But if you didn't have a draft animal, who got to be the draft animal? You did. By the end of the day, you're tired. So, what the servants would like to do is they'd like to be in their PJs with all the lights off. And by the way, in the ancient world, did they have a light switch? What did you have to do?
Blow it out.
You had to blow it out. And if you got up in the middle of the night, what did you have to do?
Find a light.
Yeah, which might not be quite so easy, because did they have matches back in those days? Oh, what did you have to do? Click, 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 click. Ah, there we are. Now we're going. All that said, here's the point of being dressed in readiness and having your lamps lit. If the master is coming home to a dark house and he knocks on the door, "Hey, it's me, let me in." What's likely to happen if the slaves are in bed, asleep, in their pajamas, no lights on?
It'll take him a while to open the door,
Exactly.
and he's gonna be a little upset.
Exactly. You weren't prepared for me. And so that's the whole point here, of be dressed in readiness and have the lamp lit. In other words, don't put your PJs on and make sure the lamps continue to burn. You need to be dressed in your regular work clothes and standing by the door so that when the master comes and knocks on the door and says, "Let me in, it's me," then the slaves can simply stand up, open the door, and the master is pleased. And that's what he's talking about here. But there's a twist on this particular story. Kind of behind on my slides here. There's a twist to this particular story. What's the twist on this story?
The master is impressed and pleased, and he says, "You guys sit down and let me wait on you a little bit."
Yeah. That's normally not what happens. When the master comes and knocks on the door and they let him in, what are the slaves or the servants usually going to be expected to do? Help the master to get undressed, put all the stuff away, maybe even feed him a little something, because if he's walked for a ways and so forth, well, okay, he might be a little bit hungry, so let me give you a midnight snack or whatever else it might be, and then we can go to bed. But in this particular story here, it says, "Blessed are those slaves whom the master will find on the alert when he comes," because of what? Read what he says there. Verse 37. "Blessed are those slaves whom the master will find on the alert when he comes. Truly I say to you that he," speaking of the master, "will gird himself to serve." By the way, what are we talking about here when it says to gird yourself to serve? What's a girdle?
Okay, no.
It is. Yeah, it's a belt. I guess these days it's a piece of feminine underwear or whatever, but in the ancient world, a girdle was not something like that. It was basically a belt. You would wear robes on the outside, of course, but you wouldn't want your robes like flowing all the time like that, so you would end up putting either a leather belt or perhaps a cloth belt around your robe in order to kind of put things a bit more together, as it were. But if you were going to work, because by the way, robes were how long as a general rule?
Usually
Down to the floor.
length,
Yeah.
as we call them.
Pretty close floor length. For any of the ladies that happen to be here and have really ever worn a really long skirt, how easy is it to work in a long skirt? Not so much. So what they would do in the ancient world is they would, in fact, go ahead and gather their robes together like that. But then they would usually end up kind of pulling their robe up, kind of up between their legs, and then poking it into the girdle, and that way the skirt, as it were, of the robe is kind of now out of the way, and that's what it talks about here when it says he will gird himself, and then he says he will gird himself to serve, and have them, speaking of the slaves or the servants, recline at the table, and will come up and wait on them. What in the world is that talking about? Does it sound too good to be true?
No, he is impressed that they stayed up all night waiting on him, and so he is moved to do good towards them.
Yeah.
And our God is the same way.
Yeah. There will be ample reward for those who are faithful and who are found waiting, and that's the point here. When I read through passages like that about what heaven is going to be like, for me at least, to kind of, are you sure? That just sounds too good to be true. But that's what it says, is that the Lord, when he returns, finding those who are faithful and waiting for him, he will reward them enormously.
The expectation that the Lord has is very minuscule compared to the reward, right? He wants them
Yeah.
ready and basically just so that they can open the door.
Yeah,
This is, it's like the extent of what they're doing in this parable. They're just opening the door. He walks in and does all the work.
yeah, yeah.
That's incredible.
Grace, 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 right? Exactly. Well, he goes on then to talk about in verse 38 whether he comes in the second watch or even in the third and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. What's the meaning of a watch? Yes, sir.
Well, the Jews divide the night up into 4 watches. So the second and third watch would be those on either side of midnight.
So we're talking truly the wee hours of the morning. And that's kind of the whole point, that we won't know. But our job is to not, because it's important to keep in mind, when it comes to being the master, do the servants give you a curfew? You got to be in by this hour, master. You know, this is when I expect you. That's not the way it works. The master comes in whenever he comes in. The master has his own agenda. The master has his own things going on. He has his own purposes, and he comes back when he comes back, which I think all into itself has a certain meaning for us. We may say, "Lord, come quickly," and may wonder why haven't you come yet? Well, the Lord's got his own agenda. He's got his own purposes, and there's good reasons why he hasn't come back yet, but he will, because he's the one who sets the timing. We don't give him a curfew. All right. Well, we'll have to go ahead and stop here for the moment. The time is up. Thank you for all the good comments and the questions. And if you're visiting us online, we want you to know that we're very pleased that you're here, and hope that you will hang around for another few minutes. We're going to have a worship service at the top of the hour. So thanks for being here.